much. So good evening everybody, and thank you for coming along, and I hope you find that it's an interesting evening. So I published the book 4 years ago, and I had a number of reasons for writing the book. I've been collecting information on the history of Tindale for about 40 odd years and just stuffing it in a big box. And I'd come across quite a lot of information that wasn't in general circulation in the area. So that was one of the reasons. And another reason was to broaden the lens through which Tindale is viewed, because hitherto anything that's been published or meetings in local societies or whatever has focused on the industrial era, the railway, of course, the zinc smelter, the mining, the quarrying and whatnot. And yet I discovered there was an awful lot more to the history of Tindale, and I wanted to put that into the public domain because I did see a couple of sites that were of historical significance, but they have never been identified as such and were damaged as a result. So we'll start with a map of Tindale, just for anybody who's not too clear about geography. So this, at the moment, this is where, this is the little nub, the little hamlet of Tindale at the present day. When I'm talking about Tindale tonight, I'm talking about all the habitations in this sort of area, or this sort of area. But I'm also referring to the landscape, because the landscape and the habitation, the place, are completely intertwined. I would argue you cannot differentiate between the two. It's placed at the fell foot, so we've got the North Pennines. I do apologise if I'm, So this is the edge of where the fells fall into the fell foot, and it's at the top the top corner of the fell, the North Pennine Massif. And you've got the Eden Valley down this side, South Tyne Valley here. This is the A689, of course. You've got Langley here, Brampton over there, got Tindale Tarn. Also the old railway line, which some people call Lord Carlisle's Railway. And off it goes to Brampton, and at one time it linked to Langley and the South Tyne line. As well as the road, there are lots of tracks, public rights of way, and some of them are very ancient indeed. So we you need to cast your minds back now 3, 4, 5, possibly 6,000 years, and we're going to look at two sites. One site that's here. This is a house called Tortie or Tortie, Tortie. So there's a site there, and then the next site we're going to look at is about here on the top of Tarnhouse Rig. So one of the highest parts of the rig, almost level with the end of the western end of the tarn. And it's all about rocks. But Tortie or Tortie, because it's pronounced both ways in the area, I feel I have to say both ways. So there's 3 stones at Tortie or Tortie. This is known as Tortie 1 by the archaeologists that excavated the site in 2015. It was an all-together archaeology dig with Paul Frodsham. And this glacial boulder, it's 4 or 5 feet, maybe 4 or 5 feet long, and it's got lots of cup marks or cup and ring marks carved into it. So I've done the drawing just to illustrate how, where they occur all over the stone. When the site was excavated around these 3 stones, they found an early Bronze Age flint arrowhead. I've done a drawing of that. Also, I can find it, late Mesolithic flint point, a Neolithic type scraper, and a piece of medieval glazed pottery. I think the glaze was green if you're interested in those sorts of details. So that's Torty 1. Torty 2 is known locally as the Lord's Stone, and that is huge. It's several feet long and a good 5 feet wide, and it has got some cup rings carved into the sides of it. And when it was excavated, when it was looked at by the archaeologists, they think that the top of the stone has been removed to make it flat, and part of the end of the stone has been removed as well. I'm not sure why it's called the Lord's Stone. It could have been a marker, a natural marker, because it's a it's a glacial boulder, during the Middle Ages, or it could be to do with the primitive Methodists used to meet in this bit of land, and they had a big prayer tent. Then they replaced it in 1868 with a stone-built chapel here near Clascott. So whether it was to do with that, and one of the visiting preachers lay preachers would be standing on the stone to deliver a sermon, and people could sometimes gather in their hundreds at these meetings. So it might be that, we don't know. I've put in the top of, this is the summit of Tindale Fell. The cairn could be Bronze Age, and similarly the one on the top of Cold Fell, but nobody knows, it's never been looked at really. And the currick, the big currick, which was there 40 odd years ago when I first went up there, that could be more recent, of course, just built from the cairn. And that little one is the one that's appeared in the last 10 years or so. Now the third stone, I haven't got a photograph of it, but it's near Torty 1. So stone Torty 3 is a smaller glacial boulder, and it's just the right size for sitting on, and it's quite comfortable apparently. And the most exciting thing about it, I think, is that around it they found little chips of flint, tiny little fragments of flint. So somebody 5,000, 6,000 years ago sat on this stone and was probably preparing flint arrowheads for the next day's hunt. Do you remember I mentioned there was another site we were going to go to at the top of Tarnhouse Rig, just level with the western end of Tindale Tarn, and on one of the highest points of the rig, and it's just off the public footpath, so if you're that way inclined you can walk and go and look for it. So there's this lovely stone. It's not very high, it's about this high, and when the reeds are high it's hard to see. It seems to like to hide itself away unless you know where to look for it. It is a marker stone, and it's in a place where you can see for miles in every single direction. Now this little hill here, this is called Torty or Tortai, and the Torty stones are just the other side of that hill. So that's about a mile away from this standing stone. 3 miles in this direction over here, just into the crossing the Northumberland border onto the Hartley-Burn Common, there are 3 boulders with cup and ring marks on. From there, standing there, sitting there on the stone and looking towards Hartley-Burn, if there were people over there with a hearth, you would see the smoke rising from it easily. And it's on a route. All these stones are on a natural route at the fell foot of coming up the edge of the Eden Valley, up the western side of the North Pennines, then just round the top of the Pennines, the North Pennines, along Tindale, along this sort of natural valley of the Hartley Burn that then flows into the South Tyne. So now we're going to, the other thing I meant to say is there's only 18 sites of prehistoric rock art recorded in Cumbria, and of course this is one of them. So now we're going to have a quick look at kingdoms and place names local to Tindale. So these are Cumbric place names. So the name Tindale, or when you've lived there donkey's years, you just call it Tindale, started as Tinial or Tinial. Tindletown, Cleskets, and Cleskets is right by where the Lord's Stone is. Lanacost, of course, Tolkien, Spade Adam, Irthing and Gelt Rivers, Tarmonth Bell, and lovely Castle Carrack. So they're Cumbric. So how long have they been around? We don't know. Because, so this is just a very simplified version of the who was in power at what particular time in the area around Tindale. So the Brythonic or the Brittonic tribes spoke Cumbric, then the Roman occupation, then the Brythonic kingdom of Reged, Cumbric. Now when I say spoke Cumbric, I was talking about the people who were in power, the higher echelons of the society spoke Cumbric. We peasants probably may always have spoken Cumbric through that. Who knows? I don't know. Cumbric was spoken, then Anglo-Saxon, the Brittonic kingdom of Strathclyde, again Cumbric spoken, then that was incorporated into the kingdom of Scotland, and then of course along came the Normans years later, nearly 100 years later, after the Battle of Hastings, because we Northerners fought madly to protect our lands. So what I'm getting at is the Cumbric place names, we don't know how long they are, how old they are. It could have been from the time of Strathclyde. We don't know. You can't say, oh, it's 2,000 years ago. So we're going back to the time, towards the end of the Kingdom of Scotland and the beginning of the Norman power in this area. So David I of Scotland, he was the last king of Scotland. He was. If you think of the Kingdom of Scotland, you might simplify it and think, well, Scottish. It wasn't like that, because David I of Scotland, he was a Scottish king, but he spent some of his teenage years in the court of Henry I. And after that, he was an ally of Henry II. And he took on a lot of Norman ideas and he used them to Normanise the Scottish power system, wheelings and dealings. The chieftain, who had all the estates around Tindale, huge, thousands and thousands of acres, including Tindale and the hunting forest, which I'll come to in a minute. He was a supporter of David I, and so he too could have taken on some Norman ideas. Now his name was Gill, or Gilly, Gille, and he gave his name to Gilsland. Now, yes, Gilsland, the village has his name, but I'm talking about the barony of Gilsland, whose seat of power turned into Narworth Castle and was this huge estate of which the land where Tindale is was part of as well. The reason I was saying all that is because, so here we've got Tindale again, there, in Tindletown. This is the boundary of the old medieval hunting forest, and it could be about 850, even older than that, years old. It's bounded, the boundary originally was marked with a bank and a ditch, a hedge bank and a ditch all the way around here to about here. And then when it got to the upland, it's all marked with piles of stones, cairns, over the top of Coldfowl, down the other side, that bit. Piles of stones, individual stones, posts, mounds. Quite a bit of that is still visible today, particularly the bits that go over the fells. By 1603, The lower ground boundary at there'd been a stone. It was a stone wall, and it's clearly marked on a map of 1603, drawn as stones. Now, within the hunting forest, obviously, the likes of you and me, we couldn't go in, you know, because of the poaching things. There were only 5 ways into the forest. 3 of them were for the 4 habitations that were in the forest at that time, and 2 of them was to do with the old road there. So this is A689, which roughly follows the route of the old road, and then the old road, it was a green road. It doesn't go into the forest, it stays out of the forest. You don't want the, you know, the riffraff going through there. We have to, you know, keep out. But it cuts across this corner, and that's just because of the geography. It's just far too difficult for, you know, for carts and things like that. It's really rough ground. And then off it goes again on what's now the A689. And it goes this way, and it meets up with the Maiden Way here. And of course the Maiden Way was paved, the Roman roads were paved up until the 17th, 18th, 19th sometimes, generally speaking. And then of course when land was enclosed, when the commons were enclosed, the stone from the Roman roads would be pinched to build our lovely stone walls that we see today. Also, we've got the Green Road, and then we've got this Drove Road, again, that heads to the Maiden Way, and that was kept out completely from the hunting forest, because obviously they didn't want cattle and sheep and whatnot going through the hunting forest. There's 4 sites that I'm going to talk about next, which are date back to this time. There's Roachburn. Now there is a farm called Roachburn, just here, but the name Roachburn at that time I think referred to a wider area, but based there, I think it referred to this sort of area here. So that's one. Then we've got Tarn House here, and we've got Closgill in this area here, and also Temple Garth, which is in this area here. Oh, and one last word about the old roads and things. So we've got the Maiden Way on this side, north-south, east to west, from Brampton going south following the Fell Foot. There was a very old road, the Via Regia or Via Regia. And then of course at Brampton, you could pick up the Staingate to go to Carlisle. This is the old Green Road. You know where the old Green Road veered? It was sort of bypassed by the A689 and went up around the top of the hunting forest. Well, this is the old Greenway, and it goes all the way up around the back of that's Roachburn Farm, up on the top there. This stone wall, it'll be 19th century, or even, that follows the route of the old boundary of the hunting forest. All this land here, that's Fires Pike, was hunting forest, and a whole load more over this way as well. I think the Greenway, it would have started as a pack horse route, and when going back to David I, when he held this land, he also had the mint in Carlisle, and silver from the Alston silver mines was brought down to the mint in Carlisle. So it's very, very likely indeed, because this was the quickest way, that on the pack horse route along here the silver was brought. By 1603, this was a substantial green road, and it had to be because there was coal mining in the area, and it would have taken coal wagons, and it's really rough, up and down, boggy, terrible terrain really, to have a horse and cart laden with coal. The earthworks are quite substantial, really big ditches, some really huge culverts made with these enormous slabs of stone. Now this is a public right of way, so again you can walk it if you are that way inclined. Now at the top this stone that comes down as a gate. Just this side of the gate, there's this stone. It's a resting stone, and it's there to sit on, and it's very comfortable. Another stone to sit on. For people walking, obviously carrying goods, you can sit down, have a rest, put your pack on there, or maybe you're carrying a relative's coffin to Farnham Church in this direction for burial. You could rest the coffin on there and have a breather and look at the scenery, because it's really... This was superseded by the opening of the Turnpike Road in 1833, and then of course the A689 superseded that. Rocheburn Farm, the earliest written record from Rocheburn is in 1293, when there was a fulling mill. These are ploughing strips, as I call them, ridge and furrow, and of course this wall sits on the top of them, so they extend into the next field as well. There's a lot of those in the south-facing fields at Rocheburn Farm. In 1502 there was a hamlet called Rocheburn, and it said there are 10 messuages. That's a messuage, I think that's a Norman word for farm, small farm, a small moulding, and 20 ox gangs of land, which is about 300 acres. An ox gang is how far an ox could plough in a day, and obviously that depended on the conditions. And interestingly enough, Rocheburn Farm now is about 300 acres. That could just be coincidental. And as well as the little farms, there was common grazing land just to the north of Rocheburn. So that's the first place associated with the time of the hunting forest. Now this place, Temple Garth, you will see that from the A689 when you're travelling along between Tindale and Hallbank Gate. Look south towards the fells, and it stands alone in a field. You can't miss it. Very unusual. And as its name suggests, it's got a temple in it. It probably has links with the Knights Templar. Now they were founded in the early 12th century and disbanded in 1312, so this is helping date this building, not this building, this site I should say. In 1245 there's a reference to, now this is in the Lanercost Cartulary, which records the wheelings and dealings of Lanercost Priory, you know, who's giving what land, who's giving what tithes, all of that kind of thing, to keep the place going. So in 1245, the Priory refers to its holdings at a place called Clowesgill, which is somewhere else I'm going to talk about in a minute, being bounded by a dyke between Terran Templi, Temple Land, i.e. Temple Garth, and Lambert Garth, Lambert Hills, which is next to the farm at Clowesgill. By 1485, there was a messuage, another small farm here. It had 100 acres of hay meadow and a house. And when you look at this, there's some absolutely huge footings of this building and lots of, evidence of it being a bigger building and other things happening at that site. By the 1600s, it was a productive dairy farm, sheep, cattle, horses. Now, I did mention about the dike between Temple Garth and the next bits of ground, and it's still there now, and it's here. It's this, and it's a really substantial dike, and this stands alone in its field, and at the side of the field there's this the plantation, and so you're looking at something that's 800 years old or more, and nobody until Janet Lambert, who did a lot of research about this area, pointed it out, and the whole place has got plenty of these indications of things that were happening a long time ago, and they have never ever been explored. So Clowesgill. Now I haven't got a photograph of Clowesgill, but I'm going to read you a little bit from the book about Clowesgill. And it was a farm. So by 1170 it was a sheep farm. So it was just this land on this side of the bank. Yeah, so in 1271, William and Agnes de Mora agreed a rent for the farm of 20 shillings and 3 loads of an 8-ox wagon of hay. So that was a really, really big wagon if it was being pulled by 8 oxen. As part of their tenancy, they were forbidden to cut the wood at Clowesgill except to make and repair buildings. Sadly, a few years later, Agnes, in liege widowhood, quitclaims all her land at Clowesgill in return for an annuity. And I shall mention them at the end, actually. But so there she is. A few years after that, her husband has died, so she gives up the farm and is given a widow's pension. So the fourth site is this beautiful house. This is Tarn House, and it's thought that it started life as a peel tower with a curtain wall. Now the walls inside are really, really thick, several feet thick. And they're so thick actually that I think it might have been in Edwardian times when they decided to have an inside loo, that upstairs they actually burrowed into these great big thick walls and made a very spacious toilet, a little room for the toilet. So that gives you an idea of... So in 1485 is the first written reference to this site, but obviously things were going on a lot earlier than that. And it was to a house that was for the getting of sea coal. Now obviously it's not near the sea, I think that just means coal that was very close to the surface that you didn't need to go mining for. And of course it was plentiful in that area. And as well, in 1485, the house, the land and the coal mines had been rendered worthless by the Scots. Now, the border warfare had been going on for nearly 200 years. Edward I stirred it up in the first place with his massacre at Berwick-on-Tweed, and then of course William Wallace and set off a whole chain of events still going on 200 years. So also in 1485 there's a mention of the fish ponds at Tindale Tarn being only worth 6pence, again on account of the Scots. Now it's interesting about this mention of fish ponds, and in 1169 the tithes from the fish at Tindale Tarn were given to, were promised to the Lancashire Priory. And you're thinking, oh, fish, in the tarn, well, they only catch the odd one every now and again. But of course, there was like a miniature fish farm, most likely, at the far end of the tarn. And in 2020 and 2021, they were really hot, dry summers. And when a few of us were up the fell and we could look down, you could see this rectangular, different coloured shape in the ground, quite big, in one of the fields near Tarn House. Anyway, some archaeologists have taken a look at it and they think it was like, it's quite common at that time, just a series of fish ponds, quite often in ornamental shapes. So a tenth of those fish would go to the priory, and that makes a lot more sense. Anyway, all those ponds were only worth 6pence in 1485. So the border warfare continued until the time of James VI of Scotland, James I of England, in 1603. And then something really important happened for that estate, all those thousands of acres in the barony of Gilsland, that Lord William Howard, who gave his name to the secondary school, and the pub, the Belted Will in Holbank Gate, many of you will know that, I'm sure. Well, in 1603, he became the 30th holder of the barony of Gilsland, of which of course Tindale's a part. And he set about restoring order. And is there anybody with a family name Armstrong in the room? No. Oh, well, that, yes, right. Well, I've got a trigger warning for you, so you might need to want to cover your ears. He reputedly hung 63 plundering, marauding Armstrongs from a tree in the grounds of Narworth Castle. You'll be pleased to know the tree's not there anymore. There are stumps still available if you want to go and pick it or something. Anyway, as well as doing that, he set about improving his estates, the land, the agriculture and coal extraction. So that's the start of the, real build-up of industry in the area. So by 1770s, there was several adit workings into the face of Tindale Fell. There was an awful lot of coal in there, and at that time they had wooden rails inside the workings, and as more adit workings were burrowed into the fell, they linked up different workings, and all this was done underground on wooden rails. In 1798, Frederick Howard, the then Earl of Carlisle, built a wooden wagonway high up on Tindale Fell, and to take the coal in wagons pulled by horses on wooden rails down off the fell, through Howgill, Holbank Gatish, and onto Brampton, which is a fantastic undertaking. And that, I suppose, is the very beginning of the what some people call Lord Carlisle's Railway. Oh yeah, that might be not photograph, obviously. It's supposed to be, according to Wikipedia, Lord William Howard Belted Will, but I think I don't know, it just doesn't look like the person I have in mind, so I'm not quite sure it's the right one, but anyway. The wooden wagonway on Tindale Fell was extended further along the fell and high up. I think it went to almost about 1,000 feet above sea level, which is, when you think about it and the conditions, and it's quite an achievement, and to be working there as well. By and the wooden rails started to be, the wooden rails were starting to be replaced by iron rails. In 1825, the wagonway between Midgeholm and Holbank Gate was begun, and that had iron rails from the start, and it was specifically built for steam engines. And of course, drum roll, George Stephenson was the engineer behind it all. This is the part of the route of the old wagonway high up on the fell. And this is the solway you can see over there. And if there was sound, you'd be able to hear larks singing as well. So this is so if you don't know it, I'm sure most of you do, but this is a little hamlet of Tindale, but there's other, obviously, houses and things that are part of Tindale, but not actually in this little bit here. This is the railway, the old railway line along here. Goes to Midgeholm that way, off to Holbank Gate through Cutting that way. So this is called the Battery, and we still call it the Battery. And at its time, it's 80 feet high, 300 yards long, and nothing like it had ever been built previously. I think I'll have to add in Britain, because there might be somewhere in the world that something's been built of that sort of ilk, but obviously not for railway. So if ever you're walking over here, you are literally walking in George Stephenson's footsteps, which I find quite exciting. There was pioneering engineering going on at Tindale. There was the early use of iron rails. There was this huge earthwork. There was the standard gauge rails were used, even though it wasn't known as standard gauge, and half the rail networks in the world use standard gauge now. So basically what I'm saying is the Tindale area was at the cutting edge of new technology at that time. And it was known throughout Britain for this. Now, speaking of, we have rockets. So Stephenson's rockets. So this is I think it's the foot plate, I would assume. So this is the back end of rocket, which is my favourite bit, because here it is, this late Georgian machine that looks like a sort of late Georgian Mad Max machine with all the rivets and everything. And I took that photograph in Newcastle when it came up. It was lined up for the Great North Exhibition, or whatever it was called. It was purchased in 1837 and was housed at Mac Dawes Hall. Now, I need to explain about this because it's quite important. So Dawes Hall is the very first name in the last few hundred years for that site at Tindale. About the same time, about 1837, the first cottages in that little knot that makes the current hamlet were built, and they're called Dawes Hall Gate cottages, and it was 3 of them. And I just think that was because of rocket being housed there, and you'd have your engineer, go polish rocket, and it wasn't going up and down pulling coal trucks. And of course, when rocket arrived in 1837, it would have been in Lord Carlisle's livery of, I think it was yellow and black, I'm not sure. Not obviously looking like that photograph. Again, it was at the cutting edge of technology. It was iconic, like Apple iPhones and even the early ones and so on. 15,000 spectators watched rocket and the Rainhill trials achieve a magnificent speed of 30 miles an hour, and at the time that was mind-boggling. And there was rocket built for speed, ending up at Tindale or Dawes Hall, pulling coal wagons. Poor thing, what a come down in the world. And of course it struggled, because it was to show the possibility of this technology and also to win. It only worked 4 years along the line, and then it was laid to one side, and then sometime later it was sent or given to the Science Museum in Kensington in London. There are still remnants of the early railway to be found at Tindale. So the top left, that's an iron fish belly rail up on the fell, being used as an easier way to get over this quite deep dike. Bottom left, that's one of 4 fish belly rails that prop up a small bridge at Tindale. Sort of, in the ground like that is vertically to help hold it in place. And that one, you can tell it's being designed by George Stephenson, by the particular style of the end bit of it, whatever you call it. This is on the right here at the top. That's an old, you probably know this, and I do apologise if you do, a stone sleeper from the time of the iron rails. And you can even see in the middle a line going up and down, a rusty line from the rails resting on it. Another bit of fish belly rail, and obviously one of the old wagons from when the line closed in 1953. So, moving on to coal. This is the Rochburn pit. So right at the top of the hill, just visible, that's Rochburn Farm. So this photograph was taken from the hamlet of Tindale, looking northwards. Now Rochburn pit, it was sunk in about 1893, and it was cutting edge technology was used. It was a very ambitious enterprise, and it was the first in Cumbria to use electric pumps underground. It was a very wet pit, and the pumps removed 12,000 gallons a minute. The pumps were driven by a steam turbine that powered the generator for the pumps. And the boiler needed clean water, of which there was none available locally. So it was taken from off the Blackburn, 1.5 miles away, and piped from over the shoulder over the eastern shoulder, so to speak, of Tindale Fell to the mine. Now, so this fell here that Rochburn sits on, this is Denton Fell, and there was a heck of a lot of coal in there. So tunnelling away, it met up with the pit from the North Byron pit. So if you're on the A69 and you see a sign for Byron Terrace, I think that must be near where the pit head was from that Byron. Anyway, it met up with the workings underground with Byron pits. So there was 4.5 miles of workings under this fell. So it looked, there was a huge investment of money for the family, particularly Charles Lacey Thompson, who had the lease from the Earl of Carlisle for the mine. It was a huge investment, but thought it was worth it because of all the coal that was available. And at first it looked as if, the future was rosy for Charles Lacey Thompson and the workforce, but that was not to happen, unfortunately. So by 1905, it was producing 65,412 tonnes in a year, and it was usual, that Denton Fell is covered by a thick layer of boulder clay, and it was usual to work the coal up to the clay below the surface. Samples would be taken, core samples would be taken of the clay to make sure, it was all solid and fine. Unfortunately, in this particular area of the mine, and I think it's called Worthington, they worked up to the clay. What wasn't taken into account, or there were 2 shallow tarns full of sphagnum moss and wet and clark and so on, right above where this the coal had been worked up to the clay. And of course the clay was absolutely saturated. There was a huge inrush into the mine. Now at that time there were about 120 men and boys underground, and 3 men from Tindale died that day. William Wharton, Robert Pattinson and Matthew Hilliard. And this is a memorial which you will have passed on the A689 at Coal Fell, which is a monument to these miners. Patterson and Hilliard, Patterson was the mine deputy, and I think he was standing in on that shift for somebody else. William Wharton had a knee that would dislocate occasionally, and Matthew Hilliard was the overman, and he was involved with the actual sinking of the shafts when the pit was first being set up, and he knew every single inch of the mine. William Wharton doesn't appear. So Robert Pattinson goes to look for him and help him, I presume, get out quick. And William Wharton had also been working in the area near where the inrush was as well. They don't appear, neither of them appear. Matthew Hilliard then goes in to look for them, and I'm just going to read you. So this was Andrew Ruddick. This recording's on there's a mining archives website. I think actually it might even be Beamish Museum's archives. So this is Andrew Ruddick, a miner. Matt Hilliard should have had the VC because when he went away, so he went to go and get William and Robert, he went away into the Jubilee. She, that's the inrush of water and mud, was pushing everything before her then. Jim Douglason, when Matt went in, Jim said, "You're committing suicide, Matt." He said, "I cannot help it, Jim, it is my duty." And he was gone in, and we had a 6 to 4 on chance of him ever getting back again. And how they died, when they died, whether they met up, and what was the matter with Wharton, there's not anybody know now. And of course that's not the end of the story, because there's a lot of bravery exhibited afterwards, in the following few days of rescue attempts, trying to keep the pumps working, building dams and so on to try and contain this inrush, all to no avail. The mine did reopen, but it closed again in 1912. 5 more miners were killed who were associated with Roachburn Pit, 4 of them in the pits and 1 on his way to work at the pits. So that's 5 more families, one of the major breadwinners gone. Straight after the Roachburn Pit disaster, 200 workers were laid off and lost the jobs. So many families, as well as grieving for neighbours, relatives, friends, had to up sticks and move to where there was work and do it quite sharpishly, because obviously there was no welfare state to help. A really traumatic time for the community. All right, so moving from one solemn thing to something else. In 1845, do you remember the battery, the big embankment, the railway embankment going across the valley and how high it was? And it had made, because it had bridged the valley, it had left a sort of big hole for the steep-sided valley of the beck. So in 1845, as there was now good rail links, the road, the toll road was in full use. There was abundant coal, there was water from the beck, all good things that a smelter works needed. In 1845, James Atwood took out a lease from the Earl of Carlisle, whose land it was, make a spelter works. So the water was used to power the spelter works initially, and also to wash the ore, the sphalerite. And the sphalerite, the zinc ore, was plentiful in the waste of the lead mining up at Men's Head. Guessed it's about 1880s when it was, at its heyday, so to speak. And Tindale that area was a good place in theory. By good, I mean inverted commas good. It was considered suitable because the spelter works gives off really noxious fumes. It was well away from population because of the toxic fumes, and it had this convenient huge hole in which to deposit the waste. And many workers moved into the area. The whole site that was leased also had to have housing on it for all the people some of the people that were moving into the area. So there were 2 terraces built by Atwood, well, obviously by his workers, not by Atwood himself. So there's this terrace that was named Gateshead Terrace, and it was 10 houses. And there was another terrace just about where I'm standing, actually, on this hill here, so of 7. And very quickly, it was just not enough. So these houses were split into 2. So they became sort of back-to-backs. So where previously there'd been 2 up and 2 down, they were back-to-backs. So there was one family on one side with 1 downstairs room and 1 upstairs room on there. So that was 20 families, and then 14 families in the other terrace. And of course families were quite, they had more children, and then you'd have other relatives there. And of course you've got all this all this is being dumped. It's all waste. It's toxic. It's full of heavy metals. Obviously there's a lot of zinc waste, which zinc's not too bad, but lead, cadmium, arsenic, mercury, selenium, and then of course you've got all the fumes, and pretty gruesome. And that was right up to where these people are living. Yeah, it's quite shocking, really. So this was really the first bit of habitation at Tindale, all south of the railway. In 1895, the lease was due for renewal, and there'd been strong complaints about pollution. Sulphurous fumes killed vegetation, made it worthless, trees died, the ewes often aborted their lambs. What effect did it have on human beings? That's one of the things that isn't noted in the records, except that the Earl of Carlisle did remark to Parliament that the housing here at the Spelter Works were kennels. However, the quality of zinc produced was the best in the country. It says quite a lot to read it, doesn't it? Also, remember this one, because towards the end I've got a photograph of what it looks like now. Now this photograph is taken looking the other way. So this is the jack. That's what we call the Spelterworks site. So this is the jack. That's the terrace I was just telling you about, Gateshead Terrace. That's the other terrace of 7 that became 14. There was a post office and a co-op, a little co-op over in this area as well. This is this school. It's knocked down in 1953. These are those Holgate cottages that were built about the time that Rocket arrived. This is the reading room, chapel, co-op and store cottages. And there's Tindale Terrace, which is a fantastic place to live. Here's the chimney for Roachburn Pit here. And right up here, through the fields, that's Roachburn Farm on the top there. So imagine living here, and it was still occupied in the 1960s by a few families who were pleading with the council to be found, council houses, with your children. This is a rail line here carrying coal from over here somewhere. Here's a big, this is the remains of a reservoir. So you've got this reservoir, the rail, then you've got all this waste right up to your house. The other thing, of course, was that the miners, so we've got Tindale Terrace, people up here, and so on. The miners had access to grazing land for a cow, they could keep land for a pig, places to grow vegetables, and an allocation of free coal, and a standard of housing which was a lot higher than the Spelterworks. This is all south of the railway line. The railway line's here. So all these buildings south of the railway line, part of the Spelterworks, and then the mining accommodation over that way. Accommodation provided for the miners much better. Now, everything south of that railway line has gone, it's been demolished. So it's a north-south divide in Tindale, so to speak. Anyway, let's move on to something happier. Newish photographs from the last few years. So the building at the top left, that's got a date still, 1888, the reading room. But actually that's older. That was built in 1868, and it was the first chapel at Tindale. There was this huge influx of workers into the area, and it got really uncomfortable sitting in there during services. So a new chapel, a really beautiful new building was built across the road. These are houses these days. So in 1888, that was inaugurated, and the old chapel was turned into a reading room. There's a photograph of Tindale Co-op. So all these are houses now, obviously. But I think that might have been 1888 as it was being built, because there's a lot of rubble on the ground. It looks as if it's nearly finished, and lovely new pointing and everything. There was a stable. Was stable in a building here. The building's still there, and just up until recent years, all the wooden stalls for the horses and the bits for the hay and the hay loft ladder was still there, and it would be brought round here and down the slope. There's rails here. This was a siding, because this is what Tindale's called the store bottom, this bit of ground here, and the railway line, the Midshore to Brampton Railway, ran along this, and there was a siding here for goods, the delivery of goods that were loaded through here to go down into the cellar, and also the allocation of miners' free coal was left there as well. It's now a lovely house. And the two store cottages, one was for the manager's family, and the other was for somebody who worked in the co-op. There was a cobbler's family there at one time. Now this is what I used to call the Holy Hut. It was the only Church of England established church presence in the village. Before the 1930s, when this was built, they used to use the school for meetings, Sunday schools and things like that. But the big driver, the big religious driver in the areas, I suppose like Alston, was Methodism, and the people that came to Tindale brought it with them, and it suited the mining families and so on a lot better, because it provided not just the spiritual side of things, but the social and the welfare and the support, and the established church couldn't keep up with that. And Rigfoot Farm began in 1914. And what happened was, when the mine closed, the Roachburn pit closed in 1912, and lots of families moved, and all the land and the allotments and things for cow keeping and pigs and things like that the miners had, there was no demand for it. So there was all these bits of land, and it wasn't brilliant land either, but that was put together to make a small holding. And 1914, the first farmer there was Robert Jackson. Now, Robert Jackson's great-granddaughter still lives in Tindale, up on Tindale Terrace, in fact. One of Robert's great-great-grandsons was born on Tindale Terrace about 20 years ago, so he lives on. That farmhouse was newly built, this bit, and the stone that it's built from was brought by horse and cart from the Roachburn pit, which is why it's this unusual shape and colour. This bit of the farmhouse, like garage and kitchen, a single story bit, and the buyer here, they're made from previous, much older houses. And this is one of the oldest sites of habitation in Tindale, going back possibly, it goes at least 1749 and possibly 1722. So the new holding was leased to Robert Jackson. He'd been employed in Roachburn pit as a stoneman and was on shift during the disaster in 1908. He was one of the last men to see Matthew Hilliard and Robert Pattinson alive, and was one of the last 4 men to get out of the mine as it was engulfed. When it became apparent that 3 men were still missing, Robert went back into the workings with 2 others to try and reach the missing men by wading through the mess of peat, clay and freezing water until it was waist deep and the men unable to move any further. Perhaps it's no surprise that Robert and his family wanted an alternative to his working underground. And of course, because the pit had closed, there was not that work available anyway. So the Rigfoot Farm, it grew from the small beginnings, and the Neve family took over the farm, the tenancy of the farm in the 1960s, and John and Evelyn Neve did a lot of work to expand the farm, develop it and improve the ground. And it's still at the moment farmed by the Neves family. So Tindale today, just to wipe that bleakness from your minds. Tindale Terrace there, fantastic place to live. Now along this line here, that was the ropeway from the pit, from Roachburn pit, just about here, up the bank, the pit. So this was the pit bank, so it would have been just a whole heap of coal waste and red ash and whatnot. Now it's an abundant wood, and I've noted at least 36 different birds using the wood for nesting, shelter, roosting, whatever. And the dawn chorus down there in May on a very early in the morning is absolutely glorious. Roachburn Farm on the top there, and this is the remains of what was the Roachburn pit area, all houses now. And this is the sort of stone buttress that supported the gantry that went over the road and then up this bank, up the pit bank here. And do you remember me saying about the jack, that first image of the jack that was, in a bit colourful, to keep it in mind? Well, that's the view of it today, taken from the same spot, more or less, that photograph was taken. And there has been some recent work done and the jack also to reduce some of the pollution getting into the watercourse. And Tindale today. So you've got the remains of Lord Carlisle's railway, the line going that way towards Holmbank Gate. It's beautiful. And I'll just finish with a little bit of basic, because one of the things that I'm really, really excited about what's happening in that area is the RSPB reserve, which is huge. It's Tarnhouse Farm and it goes around into Geltstay, all of Tindale Fell and more. They're doing some fantastic work, innovative work. And so what I'm saying really is that, in the industrial era, Tindale was, innovative, and it's happening now, but in a very different way. Basically, I'm thinking, what's going, because of the developing sustainable farming, which is sustainable for the farmer as well as the landscape and the life that depends on it. The last 20 years have been restoring the blanket bog on the fell tops there, and it's in pretty good fettle now. They've been re-wiggling straight becks, planted at least 110,000 trees on the fell side, all sorts of wonderful things, habitats, restoration and development. But not only that, the things that they're working on the reserve are influencing ideas nationally. It's becoming quite an exemplar on the reserve of what they're doing, and I'm just delighted to be able to witness it. And I'll just leave with the words of maybe, just maybe, in years to come, the corncrake might return. They might be calling from deep amongst ripening hay, maybe. The hen harrier might become revered and celebrated for their presence on these fells rather than persecuted. And just maybe Closegill Wood once more will be a delight for a bellowing midsummer stag, and somewhere that William and Agnes de Mora would recognise as the place where they gathered kindling 800 years ago. And that's my talk back to you.